history and York County history. So specifically tonight, we're going to dive into the story of Hex Hollow and Pennsylvania Dutch history, specifically what powwowing is. There we go. Mine?
Okay, so first we're going to go over our agendas. Jamie used to be a school teacher, so we like to set the stage for you guys. First, we're going to talk about what is powwowing, but I'm sure a lot of you already know what that is. Then we're going to talk about stories from York County that revolve around the subject. Then we're going to do the Hex backstory, what led up to the murders. Then we're going to talk about the murder, and then we're going to talk about the lessons that were learned after the murder.
And also, we apologize, the screen is a little bit smaller than what we're used to, but I told the guys, can you get us a bigger TV? They said it's not possible, you're just going to have to work with what we got. So it's important for you to walk away with some takeaways from today's presentation. One is that a man died, and so Dami and I tried to keep local history really light and fun, but tonight's a serious topic, so we're going to be serious. Recent research shows that this was a man who was a farmer, he was a victim, and he was not a perpetrator. We're going to get into tonight how this book right here, how many of you have ever read it? Okay, all right. So this book does a bad portrayal of Ray Meyer and the whole situation in general. And so we're going to right a past wrong. Our second takeaway is that this murder put York County on the international map and not for good. We're going to talk about why we became known across the world as a place of being backward and superstitious. The third is that powwowing is this beautiful, unique cultural practice in this area. And we're going to get into it and what powwowing is, but show of hands, how many of you already kind of know what powwowing is? Right. It's funny. Why'd you show up tonight? What are you expecting to learn? But because of this murder, it's going to go in the decline. We are not going to see powwowing around today as common. I hear that there are still some practitioners, but it used to be on every street corner here in York County 100 years ago. But because of this murder, it's going to go in the decline. And then finally, this is an example of justice working. We had a man who was murdered, and the people who murdered him were held accountable. We also have another expert in the room tonight. Sean Coxon is here. We're going to mention some of his work, and occasionally we might ask him some questions because Dami and I, it's very important for us to be accurate. Egos are not involved in this, so we might ask for him to elaborate. So if you see a random guy in the audience jumping in and adding, know that that's Sean, and he's very, very knowledgeable. So my name is Jamie Norpel, just a little bit of background on us. Like Dami said, I used to be a high school history teacher. Now I work in downtown York. I direct the York County Safety Collab. It's a coalition of law enforcement, which is totally different from what I was doing before, but I love it. I have a local history blog called Wandering in York County. I run a website with Jim McClure called Witnessing York. I got my PhD from Penn State Harrisburg in American Studies, and Dami and I are neighbors and became friends years ago, and we've been doing this for years.
Yep, and I'm Dami Miller. I have a master's in library science, and I'm the librarian for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Harrisburg. In my free time, I run Preserving the History of Newburytown, which is a historical society group that lives on Facebook for Newbury Township, and I'm a Civil War reenactor for the 87th PA in my spare time.
She is super busy. You should see her resume.
Okay, so a lot of people relate the Hex murders to Halloween. Think about a spooky murder, there's some superstition involved, but it happened around Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, by the time Thanksgiving rolls around every year, people stop talking about it. So if you really want to, hit when it's hot, it's around the Halloween time.
Yep. So now let's dive into our first agenda item, which is what is powwowing. So I'm gonna do a lot of hand raising tonight, so get your hands ready again. How many of you are Pennsylvania Dutch?
Half.
Okay. Yeah, are you Pennsylvania Dutch?
Half.
Italian. I know you're very Italian. So the Pennsylvania Dutch is a unique culture that's just to this area. So Germans migrated over here. They settled down in our area. And that's because if you look outside and you compare York County to Germany, the landscape is very, very similar. And so they found it hospitable here with the environment and the temperature. But when they moved here, a lot of the customs that they brought didn't really fit in with the local flora and fauna. So they developed their own systems, and that's what we call the Pennsylvania Dutch. And if you ever talk to someone who is still Anabaptist, whether they're Mennonite or they are Amish, they have that different dialect of the Pennsylvania Dutch, which is a blend of German and English.
Yeah, so powwow actually derives from a German word, and Jamie is more German than I am, so brosh.
I think.
If there's any German speakers here, please fix my pronunciation. But it basically means custom. So it seems to be borrowed from Native Americans, since both groups were using incantation and herbs at the time. So it really wasn't that out of the general area, or, it was something that was unique to this area, but the Native Americans were doing their own version of it, and then the Pennsylvania Dutch brought in their version of it, and it sort of blended to make powwowing.
It is unique because when you talk to people about powwowing, you always have to differentiate. You have to say this is not Native Americans. Okay. So this book right here, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand again. How many of you have The Long Lost Friend? Oh, I see it dwindling a little bit.
Did anyone bring it with them? Because at our last someone brought it last time too.
We have an interactive crowd. Good. So this is...
There's some seats up here if anyone's brave enough to come up.
So this would have been, so to be clear, Pennsylvania Dutch powwowers were Christians. So they would have had the Bible, but they also would have had this text right here. And this is The Long Lost Friend. It was written by John George Holman, and it was written in 1820. If you look at the title, it's very long. It would not pass an editor today. But you can see a collection of mysterious and invaluable arts and remedies for man as well as animals.
I mean, that would make me want to read it.
Yeah.
Just that title. Yeah, it would. But powwowing really is about the protective arts. So if you are a farmer and you rely on your livestock and your crops, you're going to want something, a belief system that helps you protect those things. So the incantations, the spells, the remedies that are in the book, they're going to help what matters most to you, your family, your cattle, your chickens, that you want them to lay a lot of eggs, you want your goats to perform and give you milk, you want your cows to give you milk, you want your crops to be hardy. So really the whole belief system is built around protective arts and healing. And a lot of them are considered practitioners of it. So think of a doctor that's giving home remedies to try and heal someone.
Yep. Yeah. And when you look at it there, I asked how many of you have the powwow book. How many of you have read Long Lost Friends? A couple of you.
Okay. It's getting lower and lower every time.
So if you open it up and you read it, it does look like it's full of spells and charms and talismans, and you can see how this is seeming very witchy, right? It's kind of a similar vein. Palindromes, herbs, elixirs, potions of animal parts. So you can see where that connection is coming from. And legend said that by simply carrying the book with you, that it would ward off evil spirits. So the book in and of itself was a talisman that you can actually buy from Amazon. So
I don't think it's so much the book. I think it's who's using the book.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff, if you look in it, is rooted in truth. So this is in the 1800s when we didn't have doctors. Germ theory didn't really even exist. They didn't understand how you got sick and the concept of viruses. And so you look to any source of empowerment. You look to any answers, and that's what this book provided. It was a book of answers, right? And a lot of people still look at it that way today. And so if you open it up, there's a lot of things in there that have proven true. So here, my mom is, her name is Anastasia Denoncourt. What a name, right? She named me Jamie. So if you ever see her, be like, where did you get that name? Not good as Anastasia. But here she's created an essential oil with calendula macurate for skincare. So she still makes a lot of her own herbs and her own teas, and she makes my own soap that my family uses. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people think that it's this mysterious thing that happened 100 years ago, but there's still echoes of it
well,
today.
How many of you are still using home remedies for certain things? Yeah, so it's
you had them to raise their hands this time.
I
Good
did.
job.
They needed me to ask the question.
Yeah. So we do want to be careful with our time tonight because it is dark. But if there's someone who wants to share any stories of someone who's been powwowed, or if you have personal experiences, we'd love this to be interactive.
Anyone? Anyone brave enough?
My grandmother was actually a powwower. She was Pennsylvania Dutch, and she would go around and take warts off of people with some of her chalices and make her own liniment and things like that. People would come to her when their children were sick or when they had strange things that were happening. Kind of
cancers, like you said, strange things. It's interesting that you said warts because that is, I was going to ask that, in what is the most common remedy in the book, and it's for warts. Yeah.
When my mom was a child, her grandma, she spilled, had tea spilled down, hot tea spilled down her face, and her grandma did a powwow on her.
Oh.
Never had any scars on her face.
Wow, interesting. You had your hand up?
Yeah, when I was little, I had warts covering both my hands. My mother took me to the doctors to get them burned off. He refused to do it and referred her to a powwower.
Wow.
He lived up in Jacobus and went and had that powwow and got rid of all the warts. They had another one.
What did they do? What was the treatment? Do you remember?
I don't remember, was the potato or onion involved with it?
Was there a string involved?
I couldn't tell you.
I think this gentleman knows what they did.
My grandmother had a remedy. She'd take, cut a potato in half, rub it on the wart, bury the potato, forget about it, it'll go away, and it worked.
Yeah, I know it involved potatoes, but I was very young at the time. I just remember she took me in to get them burned off, and he said, "Now, since you're a powwow."
Am I allowed to ask what decade this happened in?
It was in the early 60s.
Okay, that's interesting that there were doctors still referring to powwowers in the
He
60s.
was a very old-timey doctor.
Yeah, cool.
Well, it sounds like you fared better than having them burned off. So,
I did. I appreciate it.
You want to take one more?
When my sister was young, and this would have been probably early 1960, 61, she used to get terrible nosebleeds, and she would get boils on her skin. My parents took her to several doctors, repeated results. They finally took her to a powwow, and that healed her.
wow.
So you can see, I mean, time and time again, if you're getting healed, you can see where the belief comes from. Yep.
A positive belief.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought I would take one of the remedies in the book and use it as an example. So if you open Long Lost Friend, there's a home remedy where you take blue vitriol, which is copper sulfate, and, well, I'll just read it for you because it's interesting because I took it verbatim from what the book says. It says, take blue vitriol, which I've added copper sulfate, and put a piece of it in the hollow tooth, yet not too much. Spill out the water that collects in the mouth, and be careful to swallow none. I do not know whether it is good for teeth that are not hollow, but I should judge it should cure any kind of toothache. When I looked up the accuracy of is there any scientific evidence this is true, I found an article published by the National Library of Medicine where they tested it on hamsters, poor hamsters, but tested it on hamsters and it worked. There was proof that when you look at blue vitriol or copper sulfate, it actually does cure tooth pain. So again, I'm hoping that your takeaway is that this book is valid, right? It's not just a book of talismans and spells, but there's actual things in it that cure people.
I'm sure they have some way to gauge how the hamsters felt. But now for the supernatural remedies. So again, I'll just read this for you. Take 6 hen's eggs and boil them in hot ashes until they are right hard. And then take the yellow of the eggs and fry them in a grill of lard until they are quite black. And then put a handful of rue with it and afterward filter it through a cloth. When this is done, add a gill of sweet oil to it, and it will take most effect where the plaster for a female is prepared by a male, and the plaster for a male is prepared by a female. So, you know, it's more than just the recipe. Sometimes it's who's applying the thing to you. And, you know, I'm not really sure what we were trying to accomplish with that one, but...
Yeah.
But then there's also spells. So this is where we start getting into the witchcraft part of it, where people think that there's, you know, black magic involved. Because there's, you know, when you're reading these things, they sort of sound like they could be a spell that you'd cast. But notice that they talk about Jesus. So ye thieves, I conjure you to be obedient like Jesus Christ, who obeyed his heavenly Father unto the cross, and to stand without moving out of my sight in thy name of the Trinity. I command you by the power of God and the incarnation of Jesus Christ not to move out of my sight. But you can see from that it's not really a black magic as much as it's Christianity, just in a different form, delivered to you in a different way. So instead of maybe just reading the Bible, you're incorporating those scriptures into these spells or these incantations, and you're using it for good. Because again, it's all about the healing arts. You're trying to protect yourself, protect your family, your livestock, heal your family, heal yourself. So there are ways, I guess, that you could say that you were hexing someone and have a bad
Connotation with it.
a bad connotation to it. But really, I mean, there they are just using Christianity just in a different way to get the point across.
I'm getting robbed. I'm going to say, ye thieves! Like, get away.
Yeah, you have to point your finger when you say it.
So there's a difference, right, between white magic and black magic. And so when we talk about this, we're talking about white magic, of course. So we don't want you to be scared after tonight's presentation of the long-lost friend or powwowing. As Dami said, this is a very positive thing. So now let's get into some stories.
Yeah, so I mean, we can see from just the people here today that there's a lot of people in York County that have had experiences, positive experiences with powwowing. So the first time that we did this presentation, and Jamie's done this presentation by herself multiple times, we went to Facebook and we asked, you know, who has had experiences with powwowing and what were they? So you can see here someone said, thanks for sharing. 2 of my siblings and I have been blessed to have known a man with an incredible gift. And even though you didn't have to be a believer of powwowing to work, after seeing the results 3 times, I'm a believer. So, you know, there's a lot of people out there that they might not have experienced it themselves, but they've seen it work on other people, or they've had ancestors that were powwowers or went to a powwower.
Yep. Here's another one from Jane Crowder. She said, she went to, so Jim McClure, another hand raising. I hope there's a lot of them this time. How many of you ever heard Jim McClure speak? Okay. More of you need to go out and hear Jim McClure.
Well, I think, isn't he here next month?
Oh, yeah, he is here
Yeah.
next month. Yeah. If Gino was here, we can ask for the presentation to do a little promo. But Jim McClure was the editor of YDR and is the local historian, and he's also our mentor. So he's our third local hometown history.
He's the behind-the-scenes
yeah,
guy.
yeah. And so he had a woman that said she went and listened to one of his lessons on the Hex murder trial of 1928, and him and I, you know, we co-created this. And then she went back and painted this picture of a powwow doctor's residence in West Manchester Township. And she said, my grandmother used the powwow women's treatments. She said, I remember waiting outside in this car. Powwow doctors, like I said, combine folk magic and religion to heal.
Yeah, and then here's another example of some more stories. So Eric Lowe said there was a lady that lived near McKinley School that practiced. Grandpa took my aunt there because her hands were cracked and bleeding, and she put cobwebs on them and said an incantation, and it worked. And she wouldn't take money, so Grandpa left groceries on her porch. So a lot of these times they would barter or they would trade for things. It wasn't always a cash exchange, and sometimes they didn't want anything from you. But I've never heard of cobwebs for cracked hands, but apparently it worked.
Okay, so now that we've set the stage on what is powwowing, hopefully now when we talk about Ray Meyer being a powwower, you have a little bit more understanding of what that means. So we're going to get into the backstory that's going to lead up to the murder. How many of you have visited Ray Meyer's house? Look at all the hands.
I love it.
Yes. Yep. So, of course, you guys know we're really close down here. Here's a map of southern York County. And we went and took a topographical picture so you can see that it is in fact a holler, right? Like it is Ray Meyer's Hollow for sure.
So here we have our 3 killers. So you'll notice the ages. John Curry was only 14 years old. Then we have Wilbert Hess at 18 years old and John Blymeyer at 32. So there's definitely a discrepancy there between the ages.
And here's our victim. This is Nelson Ray Meyer. He was a farmer. He was born in 1868, so the Civil War had just ended, to put it in perspective of how long ago that was. Some say he was a recluse and odd, but after talking with Sean earlier, he said that, listen, he ran for public office 4 times. How can you be a recluse if you're going to run for public office? And I thought that's interesting. So we added it to the presentation. I also had on this presentation that he was socialistic, possibly socialistic. And Sean corrected me and he said he ran as a socialist. He wasn't possibly socialistic. Like he was a socialist.
He was socialist.
Which is, you know, he didn't win any of them, right, Sean?
I'm sorry, no.
Yeah.
I got 3. I only saw the vote count on one of his campaigns, and he got like 200 and some votes, but all of his competitors got votes in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes sense, socialism in York County.
I know. like we said, he was a powwow practitioner, and kinsman Jeanette Harvey described him as a kind man.
So all three of the assailants were involved in hexerexi, or witchcraft. So excuse my pronunciation of that. So that means that they were either practicing powwowing, or they believed that it impacted them or their families in some way. And Raymeyer happened to be a powwower. So there's no evidence that he ever used black magic or cast magical spells on anyone. But you can see how we just talked about people being influenced and impacted in positive ways by powwowing. But you can see that if you are someone who's down on your luck or bad things are happening to you, how that can take on a bad connotation and think, wow, maybe the powwowing's not good, maybe it's hurting me, maybe someone is putting a hex on me. So there's really two sides of it, and I can see why someone might get a little nervous and not think that it's a great thing.
Oh yeah,
So-
definitely. Yep. So I wish I could have found the book tonight, but Ross McGinnis, he was an attorney, and he wrote the book on this, right? If you want to learn more. And so in his book, he talks about was Raymeyer a witch? So what Ross McGinnis says in his book is that Alice, so Raymeyer had a wife. Her name was Alice. And in the book, McGinnis says that Alice believed that Raymeyer practiced black magic. Sean said he hasn't seen any evidence of that, right? So that is something that Dami and I are going to dive into and see if we can figure out more, because like I said, we want to be very truthful tonight, but we also, though, just didn't want to give you Sean's perspective because we also have McGinnis, so I'd be interested to have you guys both sit down and duke it out to see what that...
Oh, no, I would never get off again.
So she referred to him, is this what you were correcting me on, with she or Blymeyer?
Somebody quoted that, yes, McGinnis quoted that Alice Raymeyer called him a devilish old witch. Well, we don't know exactly what she said. The only evidence we have on that is what John Blymeyer said at his trial, and the words were devilish old cock, as in a rooster.
Right.
Yeah. And she indicated that he was playing house with, they were living apart at this time, that he was playing house with another lady down in the hollow. But she called him a devilish old cock, not a devilish old witch. And I have never read anything. She didn't like Nelson's powwow. Nelson apparently had some illnesses. He fell through his father-in-law's barn floor one time. It was a 15-foot fall and sustained quite a few injuries from that. That may have had something to do with his condition, but Nelson was getting a lot of powwow guys in there trying to powwow him. And Nelson would ask them to supper, would ask them to stay the night, and that he would put that on poor Alice. Alice set 2 extra plates at the table. Alice, make up 2 extra beds. And she was getting tired of it. Also, I read a newspaper report that she made a complaint that Nelson, complaint of assault and battery against Nelson. That was in 1924, the year they separated.
1820.
No,
Oh,
1924.
yeah, no, sorry, yeah.
If that was the straw that broke the camel's back, I don't know. She went and moved to the farm where she grew up.
I heard that he still took his laundry for her to wash.
Yep, I did hear that.
So she moves out, but he still delivers the laundry and says,
They made friends, and they were aware of their responsibility that they were raising 2 daughters. And the last time they saw Nelson was on November the 22nd of 1928. He said he would bring a goose over for Thanksgiving dinner. Now, the goose obviously never came. And so they were still friends. Nelson would work on her farm. She would do Nelson's wash. So there wasn't, they didn't hate each other. They were still friendly. And she didn't like the powwow business, but to the best of my knowledge, she realized it was powwow. It was healing.
right.
I never read anything
Okay. Sean, thank you again for your expertise. We're so glad that you're here and we're learning. So
Yes.
now we're going to build in our presentation. So we also thought we would point out that McGinnis thought that a lot of people believed that Raymeyer was simply a misfit. His neighbor, Charles Miller, thought that he was a peculiar old duck, but not dangerous.
Yeah, so Ross McGinnis again says there's no doubt that in Blymeyer's mind, Raymeyer was a witch. So he's setting the stage for why this murder occurred. And to Blymeyer, Raymeyer was a real threat. If you, again, really believe that someone's putting a hex on you and has the ability to control magic and to make bad things happen to you, you can see why, if you're, pushed far enough, why something like this could have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So the witch is dead. I can eat and sleep in peace now. And that was said by Blymeyer. Raymeyer was a real threat. And at the end of the trial, he turned to his counsel and said to his counsel that the witch is dead and I can eat and sleep in peace now. So he really thought that he took away the threat and that he was safe after the murder.
And also no remorse
Right.
after the murder. Yep. So, go ahead.
Well, 2 of the 3 knew the victim, Nelson Raymeyer, and they had visited his house before the murder. So you'll see that at the time of the murder, it wasn't all of these strangers showing up to his house. It
Yeah.
was people that he knew and people that he would let into his home
Yeah.
willingly.
And just to clarify on that point too, so Raymeyer knew John Blymeyer, and the night before he had met John Blymeyer and John Curry, but he had never met Wilbur Hess, right? But Curry had come the night before, but that was the first time that he met him.
So, and then there's the spell. So the trio, they had this whole plan, and they were going to cast a spell, their version of powwowing. So they wanted Raymeyer's long-lost friend book. They wanted a lock of his hair, and they needed to bury this 6 feet under and behind the barn. And by doing this, his spells would be broken, and that they would be free of this hex that he had put upon them. So when they went, or at least their story is that when they went to his house, they never went with the intention to murder him. They went with the intention to collect these things. Now, were they going to collect them by him just saying, hey, here's a lock of my hair? Or were they going to have to beat him for it? I don't know if they really thought that out and logically thought about how they were going to collect these items. But the story goes that they were really just going to collect items for a spell that would break the hex.
Yeah. And we're also dealing with a 14-year-old and an
Yes.
18-year-old, and then a man who is struggling with mental health.
Yeah, a 32-year-old that's hanging out with a 14-year-old
Right,
and an
struggling with mental
18-year-old.
health. Yep. So now let's get into the murder and what actually happened that night. So it was on November 27th, 1928. So to put it in perspective, this is before the Great Depression, right? So if you can imagine the roaring 20s here in York County. So life was very different back then. What happened at 11:30 p.m., the trio, the 3 men, arrived at Raymeyer's house. Now, according to legend, there was a witch over in Marietta. Have you heard this story? A witch in Marietta who told him. So the legend goes that there is a witch over in Marietta, and since Blymeyer was struggling so much with mental health, he went to her as a powwow doctor. And she said, if you pull out a dollar bill, I'll tell you who is the person who put this hex on you, right?
It'll appear on the dollar bill.
Right, and so that's what happened. So he had the bill, and on the image, he saw Raymeyer. Like he was the one who did this. Now, there was an actual woman named Miss Kopp, that was over in Marietta, but a lot of people called her Nellie
Nellie
Knoll. Yep, Nellie Knoll. Correct. Yeah, right. And that's, we're going to get into the dangers of books like this that make up. So Dami and I are very clear tonight that a lot of this is folklore and a lot of it is just truth, right? And folklore is really important. It's part of our culture. That's what I studied. My doctorate is in folklore. So it is a valid thing that's worth studying. But there's also a difference between belief systems and things that are rooted in truth, right? And so what went that night when they broke into, so they didn't break into his house, right? They were welcomed in, but November 27th, we don't know exactly what happened that night.
Well, we know that a murder was committed.
Yep.
So we know that they went in with the intention, so they say, of collecting these things for their spell, but they ended up bludgeoning him. They tie him up, and then they set him and the house on fire. And after after that, they're panicking, I can believe, so they run away without any of the items that they needed for the spell. So there you go, you've murdered someone and you don't have anything to break your hex. So all three of the men ended up being arrested, and they all ended up being convicted of murder in 3 separate trials, which is sort of interesting because these days you'll see people who commit murders together being tried at the same time. These were 3 different murders, and they were all found guilty. So then, of course, they find the body. The neighbors heard Raymeyer's mule braying, and his body was discovered 2 days after the murder, and that was on Thanksgiving.
Yep, so the neighbor heard the mule braying, and he basically was like, what's going on, went poking around, and that's when he discovered the body. So Dami said that they lit the body on fire, but it did not burn the house down.
Right.
If you watch the documentary, which we're going to mention later, the house today still has a plastic covering over that you can see where the body was burnt, but the house is still around, obviously, as you guys know.
And then, like I said, they were all arrested. So Blymeyer ended up getting first-degree murder and life, and Curry was convicted on first degree and also got life, and then Hess got second-degree murder and 10 years. So they all were convicted in separate trials. And I think it's interesting to note that Hess was 18 and Curry was 14. So take that into account when you're thinking about their convictions.
Yep.
Yeah, and then it ended up being, honestly, the biggest trial of the 20th century. This wasn't something that just hit the newspapers in New York. This went national, and then it went international. So you can imagine there's juicy details like witches and spells and murder, teenagers committing murder. So honestly, this was, fuel for the gossip, and it really just went all over the world.
Yep, and it gave us a bad look.
It did, yeah. It made us seem very backwards.
During COVID, I visited the Constitutional Museum in Philly. Has anyone been there before? Okay, some of you have. Have you? Yep. So I highly recommend that you visit. So I was walking around with my family. That's my husband in the back, and I came across these chairs. Well, this is the trial chairs from the jury that are at the Constitutional Museum. So I played musical chairs, and I sat in every single one because I thought, oh, this is really cool. But here we have the Constitutional Museum of the United States in Philly, and there's a piece of York County in it. So I know that you guys, probably most of you grew up in York County, or you're from the area, and you always just heard the stories of Raymeyer's Hollow, but know that this story is told across the entire nation. Like, people hear about this story. I also thought, so a lot of you talked about your own personal experiences, right? Well, my family, I have on both different sides of my family, I have a powwow doctor, and then one of my great-great-grandpa served on the jury that was trying them. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of we have a jury member, and then I have a powwower. So my powwow great-great-grandfather was named Wilbur Zimmerman Eisenhower, Mount Wolf area. If anyone is an Eisenhower Zimmerman in here, we're probably related. I'm related to the people in this area. Dami's related to everyone in Newburytown, but Southern York County is my space. And I wanted to point out that he was the president of the Mount Wolf School Board, councilman of Mount Wolf Borough, commander of the VFW. He fought in World War I. He volunteered for the fire company, and he was a powwow doctor. So here was this professional veteran that served his community that also practiced. So we're trying to break that image of your head of when you think of a powwow doctor and you haven't learned as much. You probably picture someone like a witch, right? Like someone's like kind of stuck in their house that comes out. But these were people that were in our society, people that you knew, and this was just kind of like a side gig that many of them had.
Right.
And then my other side of my family, my great-great-grandfather, who was on the jury, his name is Charles Rissiker. This is a picture of little Jamie when I was a little baby. It's a 5-generation picture. That's him in the bottom right. Now, I will say that there are, at the time, 3 different Charles Rissingers in York County, and he unfortunately passed away before I got a chance to ask him if it was him. So again, we want to be accurate here tonight. I think it was my great-great-grandpa, but there is a chance that it was another Charles Rissinger.
So now we're going to go through and give you a little more information about each of the assailants. So we're going to start with John Curry. So he served 10 years of his life sentence, and that was for first-degree murder. And he ended up joining the Army after his release, and he served as Eisenhower's staff cartographer. So that goes to show that there was definitely a career after prison. And then he ended up being quite the artist. So there's a lot of portraits in homes around York County that are painted by John Curry. And then we have John Blymeyer. He ended up serving 23 years, and he ended up working as a night watchman in the Philadelphia area. And a lot of people said that he ended up spending the rest of his life being really lonely and not having a lot of friends. So there was a quote here that said, he died as he had lived, friendless and alone.
Now, I have heard contradicting stories of this, just so you know. I have heard other people say that he did develop some friendships. So again, that's what makes telling this history story so challenging, because you
Right.
hear all these different perspectives, and it's hard to differentiate between fact and fiction.
Yeah, and then what about Hess? So he ended up serving 10 years for the second-degree murder charge, and then he ended up obviously having a life after this. And Gary Hyland, he ends up talking about working with Hess in the 70s and how, you know, just meeting him, you wouldn't suspect that this was someone that served time for murder. So in the 70s, I worked with Wilbert Hess at McKay Company in York. Wilbert was a genuinely nice guy and was a good employee, and I didn't know of his conviction for the Hex murders until after the time that I worked with him. I believe that he had a son, Donald, and I think Wilbert was also a caretaker for a church in the area of Dead Man's Curve near Pine Grove. So there's someone who spent years in prison for second-degree murder, and then by all accounts, you know, ended up being a pretty nice, normal person afterwards.
Lived a productive life.
Yeah, his coworkers didn't know. He started a family. So, you know, he was also 14 at the time
Right.
when the murder was committed. So, you know, what does that say about juveniles committing crimes
Yep.
and rehabilitation?
Yep. So now let's get into, why are we still talking about this in 100 years? What are the lessons learned, and how can we go back and kind of analyze it? So first, like I said, this is a story of mental illness, right? We are not trying to demonize the murderers in this case. We do believe that they were struggling and they were looking for answers.
Yeah. Sane people do not go into people's houses to try and break spells and then murder someone.
So here we have a law-abiding citizen who was killed in what I was considering a home invasion. Sean disagreed with that because he said they were invited in. You know, I'm like, that's a good point. To me, though, you know, you invite someone in, and if it ends up in murder, to me, that feels like an invasion, but I'll let that up to you guys. And it was really a terrible moment for the families, plural, not just the Raymeyers, but all 4 families involved in this. It was terrible for everyone. Ricky Ebal is the great-grandson and the best-known descendant. He is in the room tonight, but I was asked, I saw your hand up, so I'm going to say, okay, he asked to remain anonymous, but here's Ricky. If we could give Ricky a round of applause, please, for showing up.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
So it's kind of a big deal that, you know, we have Blymeyer's family in the room tonight, and he's here wanting to learn. Raymeyer, sorry, Raymeyer, yeah, in the room tonight. And I hope that we got it right and we did your family right by telling this story, and I'm sure you'll correct us after this if we have anything to fix.
So that brings us to York County's embarrassment. So as I said earlier, this ended up being not only a national story, but an international story. So when you think of York County, you know, you think of homegrown small town. You don't think of making the international news. And it was really embarrassing. They really looked at us as this like backwoods redneck kind of people that just thought, oh, there's witches running around and I'm, you know, anything bad happened to me is because of a hex. So it really overshadowed the good things that were happening in York County in that time period and really put like a stain on the county.
All right, let's do a quick check for understanding. I don't mind if you say under your voice or really loud, but what year did this murder take place? Good. So what time who was the famous, I didn't tell you this, I'm just checking to see how much you know history. Who is the famous steel tycoon who went around the country trying to get people to build libraries? Good job. Okay. So Andrew Carnegie came to York County and he wanted to put a library here in the early 1900s. We said, no, we're not going to build one. So anyone want to guess, when did we start building, when did we put our first library in? I'll give you a hint. It's after this. Yep. 1935 was when Martin Library was built. So when this story was told around the country, people said, oh, isn't that the place that doesn't have a library?
They turned down the Carnegie Library. They must not be able to read. That's why they think there's witches. And then here, this is one of our favorite artists. If you know Lewis Miller, you can see his work at the York History Center, but Jamie and I love him. And he was really famous for creating pictures of what life looked like. So you can see this was the training grounds and York City during the surrender. You can see the flag right there.
The Civil War surrender.
During the Civil War, yeah. And then you can see that there was more happening in York County than just the Hex murders, but you honestly, if you read the newspapers at the time, you wouldn't know that, because the Hex murders really overshadowed the things that were happening, like amazing artists and, you know, different offers of having Carnegie libraries built, and
Yeah.
so
if the picture on the left is of York's surrender to the Confederates, what's the picture on the right? I heard of the race riots.
race riots.
Absolutely. So this is the National Guard coming in to, again, little old York County, Pennsylvania. So our point is that we don't want to say the Hex murder completely ruined York County. There are other embarrassing moments as well.
unfortunately we tended to do that a couple of times.
But we have some positive things we want to point out.
So who's heard of the Articles of Confederation?
Hey, there we go.
The colonial complex down in York. And then, you know, we had, during World War II, we really spurred on industrial change and industrialization in York County, and it was called the York Plan, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the York Plan. So, you know, we weren't just sitting back and letting things happen. We were going to work, and we were manufacturing things and doing our best to really make our mark during World War II and help America as much as we could.
Yeah. Dami and I have an upcoming presentation next week. It's going to be online only. We're going to talk about all the presidents that came to York County. Over 30 York County presidents visited York County.
Yeah, so this terrible moment just before York County became known worldwide for its technology prowess, and it's an interesting combo of high tech and industrialization, and then witchcraft and high superstition, and it's all happening in the same place at the same time.
This is also an example of doing the right thing. So Nelson Raymeyer was buried, given a Christian burial, right? He's buried at this church right here down in Shrewsbury. So another hand raise. How many of you have been there? Okay, yep. So Reverend Bowersox, he proceeded over it, and he said, "I am sure that the general light of this community is far above anything so dreadful." So while a lot of people considered Raymeyer a witch, right, and in this book, again, we're going to talk about this in a second, the way it demonizes Raymeyer, he was given a Christian burial and remembered for the right things.
And then we have our redemption arc here in York County. So Ross McGinnis, it was a moment when York County court system ran through chaos, and it brought order, and it brought justice. So it shows you that the court system can work, and there can be justice. Yeah. So Ross McGinnis is quoted as saying, "Having a good lawyer can make all of the difference." So Gross convinced the jury that Wilbert Hess, the third defendant, was the sacrificial lamb. And you'll know that he was only 18 at the time, or 18 at the time, and that he had gone down to the hollow to break the curse, and it was hurting his family, and it was hurting him, and he needed to break this curse. He truly believed that there was something bad happening to him. Now, did he truly believe that, or did he have a good lawyer that spun that story? At the end of the day, Gross got second degree in spite of all of the notoriety and publicity, because you remember the other men got first degree murder and life in prison. And then you have the third that ended up getting a lesser sentence. So, and this whole time the rumor mills are going and newspapers are being printed and the story's getting more and more ostentatious, and they were able to use that momentum and get a lesser sentence than Blymeyer and Curry in that trial. So he did have a really stellar lawyer at the time.
Do you know what he played on when he was up there standing trying to convince people that his 18-year-old client deserved a lesser charge? His mom.
Yep.
His mom was in the audience, and he said, "Look at that mom. How could you put this guy away? Like, she's a great mom. I raised him well, and she's over there crying." And it worked. He got second degree.
He's young and confused.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what
order
order they did. Yep. So one of our final takeaways is the problems with dangerous information. So I already asked you if you've read this book by Arthur Lewis. This was written in 1929, and I feel like I shouldn't quote you, Sean. You're in the room. Do you mind just saying a couple words on why this is so dangerous and why it's not a good text to read?
Well, that's a whole other presentation. But the book, Arthur Miller, who wrote the book, his point of view was that John Blymeyer was truly insane, truly, and that this was a great injustice that was done to him. And that's a pretty good point of view. So in the book, he advocates.
They asked if you would speak into the microphone if you're willing to, because they can't hear you online.
People are watching us online? Yay!
That book, Hex, by Arthur Lewis, Lewis maintained that John Blymeyer, a great injustice was done to him because he was truly insane. He really did have mental issues, and that he should have been remanded to a mental facility and not prison for the rest of his life. And that's a valid point. That's a valid point. So in the book, he wanted to advocate for John Blymeyer, but for some reason he felt like he needed to villainize Nelson Raymeyer. In other words, make Nelson Raymeyer appear as an evil witch, magician, practitioner of the dark arts. And there are all kinds of stories in that book that are just not true. Stories about the Blymeyer's background, story about Nelson's background. Like, well, have you heard of Nellie Knoll? Does anybody know that name? Okay, she wasn't a person. She didn't exist. Arthur Lewis just made that name up. The real name of that woman in Marietta was Emma Knopp, spelled with a K, K-N-O-P-P, Emma Knopp. There was no Nellie Knoll. Another lie that some of you may know, the story of when Blymeyer, as a little, either a baby or a toddler, was taken to Nelson Raymeyer to be cured. Do you know that story? Did you? Anyway, that's just not true. You can look at the testimony of both John Blymeyer and John Blymeyer's father, Emmanuel Blymeyer, that he was never taken to Nelson Raymeyer to be powwowed. It never happened. And there are a whole bunch of other things in that book that are just wrong. But, another thing, he was describing Nelson Raymeyer and trying to make Nelson out to be as evil looking as possible. One of the things he said was, if you look at Raymeyer's deep-set eyes, you know that somewhere along the line, some American Indian heritage got into the Raymeyer family that had been settled in York County since colonial times. Okay, there's a lot wrong with that. Nelson Raymeyer's father, Henry Raymeyer, was born in Germany. How many American Indians do you think were running around northern Germany? Not too many. Okay. So, you know, ridiculous stories like John Blymeyer's, he got the name of John Blymeyer's grandfather and great-grandfather all wrong, claimed that John Blymeyer's great-grandfather had a pet owl that talked. Another thing was he said John left home because he felt like the spirit of his great-grandfather was troubling him because they were buried in the family plot just 100 yards away from the house. Okay, that's not true. Do you all know Mount Zion Potosi Church? Do you know where that is? That's where John Blymeyer's parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents are buried. They're buried in a churchyard, not in a family plot that's just a few hundred yards away from the house. But anyway, looks like I'm being hustled off here. It's a bad book.
It sounds like, Gina, we need to get Sean in for another presentation, maybe this summer and the fall, where we can dive more into the inaccuracies of it. Yep. Another thing we don't want you to watch.
So when Donald Sutherland passed away recently, I think this brought it back into popular culture. I know I rewatched it after Donald Sutherland passed away, but do not watch Apprentice to Murder and take it as gospel. It is Hollywood, and it is a dramatic retelling, if you even want to call it a retelling.
Yeah.
But yeah, do not watch that and think that you know everything there is to know about the Hex murders. Just enjoy Donald Sutherland.
Here's a good source, though. There's an excellent documentary called Hex Hollow. You can buy it on Amazon. It's very, 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 very good.
I think it's free on YouTube.
Is it?
Yeah.
The librarian knows where all the free things are.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think if you look it up on YouTube, you should be able to watch the entire thing for free.
So finally, like we said, this is the decline of powwow now after this.
Yeah, so obviously the target of the trio was the book, The Long Lost Friend. So it was a symbol of the strain of white magic that had gone amok in York County. So it really took on a different connotation after that. You know, before it was really just a guide to help heal people, and now people were looking at it in a different way.
Yep. So the idea of the good old days back in York County. Yeah.
Were they that good?
Yeah, so we're gonna, near the end here, Dami's gonna quote Ross McGinnis because it really captures kind of the essence of what this was like in the 1920s.
Yeah, so witchcraft, powwow, and the long lost friend were the customs of rural society long since gone, which had no place in the 20th century, yet here we were, popping up like some mischievous jack-in-the-box that wouldn't stay put.
Oof.
I know, I couldn't have
Oof.
summarized that. I needed to quote that directly.
Yes, he said, come back with me to an earlier time, a simpler time, a time before the Great Depression, before World War II, when many people throughout the land and in York County fervently believed that there were mysterious forces that were not of this world and not of human creation. We should get royalties for selling his book.
You could do the audiobook.
Yeah.
But you can see but you can see from quotes like that, and then from artwork like this from Brett Greiman, you can see why it has that spooky feel to it, and why around Halloween these topics start taking on a whole new life. But that is scary.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that a panther coming for him?
Looks like a dog.
A dog?
Dogs, yeah.
Wolves?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
And also, I mean, I don't think that we should be scared of our heritage. You know, you talk to your grandparents. Like my grandmother was powwowed, and when I went and interviewed her for it, she said, "I don't know. We don't talk much about it." But let's talk about it. This is a part of our history. Even, like I said, my mother, there's a picture of my mom and I collecting echinacea, because we drink echinacea in our tea. It's really good for you. It's for your immunity. And that's a lot of my mom's collection of her herbs, and, you know, call her witch, whatever. But, like, you know, we're still practicing it.
yeah, and then we want you to follow our hometown history pages more after this. So we focus primarily on York County history. So we have a YouTube channel called Hometown History, Jamie and Dami's Yoko backstory, and we have 101 videos as of yesterday.
Oh, we should have done a celebration.
Yeah, and we're actually in season 5. So season 5, episode 1 was just uploaded, and it's about the Modern Air Motel, and we were able to interview the sister of the man that built and owned the Modern Air Hotel. She's 90 years old. So we were, you know, blessed to be able to speak to her, and with Tom Davidson. We also have our own website. So Jamie has Witnessing York with Jim McClure. You can go there. They make blog posts, and a lot of it corresponds to hometown history. We have a hometown history Facebook page. We have an Instagram page. We upload all of the audio from our presentations as a podcast, so you can listen to those for free on all of the podcast forums. And we also have Preserving the History of Newberrytown. You have Wandering in York County.
Yep, yep.
So we're all over. We're chronically online, or at least I am.
So I'm not sure when this was meant to end, if it was meant to end at 8, but we have a few minutes if anyone would like to tell stories or have any questions.
Has there been a book written that's truthful about this sex murder?
Scott McGinnis, not Scott, Ross McGinnis.
Ross McGinnis, his book
Yeah.
is what you want to read.
Yep. Trials of Hex, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Trials of Hex. And he was an attorney, and he did his research, with the exception of, I think Sean had a couple corrections in it, but generally, it's Ross McGinnis's book. Yeah.
Should be able to find that on Amazon
Yep,
or
that's where I bought
eBay.
it.
So, way in the back.
My great-grandfather was a powwower who was invited for practicing medicine without a license.
Oh,
I wonder if that was common.
And not that I know of. This is the first I've ever heard that you said, was he actually convicted?
I don't think so. My son works at the PA archive and actually found a copy of the indictment.
Yeah.
Okay, so this gentleman is saying that it was your grandfather, you said?
Grandfather.
Great-grandfather was indicted for practicing medicine without a license, and he was powwowing, and he wants to know if that was something that happened on a regular basis. And I think you have an idea.
It did happen after the murder.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
after the murders, that spurred on.
They went on a crusade.
Okay, so they were really cracking down. They didn't want anyone claiming that they were practicing medicine,
Wow.
powwowing without a license. So
Wow, that's really complicated.
that
isn't
is very complicated.
Mm.
I've seen instances where over Lancaster County and some other places where even as early as the turn of the century, where doctors were going after powwow practitioners because people wouldn't go to the doctor. They would go to the powwow practitioner and he was losing his money.
Okay.
And, not being paid, so he would go after them legally.
Because at the end of the day, it's a business, and it's about money. Yeah. I'll let you.
Blindmire Hollow is just north of Raymeyer's Hollow. Is that where Blindmire's family was from? Is that how he knew Raymeyer?
I see Sean shaking his head up and down.
Yes, he did. John Blindmeyer, when he was around 10, 11, he did work for Nelson Raymeyer picking potatoes. That's where John Blindmeyer was from, in Blindmeyer's Hollow. And that's how Nelson knew him, and Alice Raymeyer, Nelson's wife, knew him when he came to her house to ask where Nelson was on Monday night. She recognized him right away because he had grown up in that community. It was called Raymeyer Valley.
Raymeyer Valley.
And it's not named for Nelson, it's named for all of the Raymeyers that settled in there.
The 6 degrees of separation, that is York County.
2 degrees.
I know.
2.
I mean, Jamie lives up the street from me. That's how Jim McClure, he ended up introducing us, and I found out that she lives in the home of my step-grandfather. So,
We're pretty incestuous here, aren't we?
anyone else?
December 10th, 1920.
We'll get you next. Sorry.
December 10th, 1928, Dr. Knoll of the York County Medical Society, he started a crusade to stop witchcraft.
Oh, interesting.
You said December 10th. So he,
December 10th, 1928.
wow.
December 10th, 1928, to stop witchcraft.
He did
So-
not wait.
No, right afterwards.
I wonder, does it say his ethnicity by chance? If he was Pennsylvania Dutch or, because I wonder if there was any type of ethnicity or cultural tensions there.
The spelling on his last name is N-O-L-L.
Okay. Well, it looks like some genealogy work for us after tonight.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yep.
Okay, the
Thank you for
gentleman
sharing
in the
that.
back.
Yes, I've always been interested in powwowing, and moved to York County and heard about this story. I was visiting the Wallace Cross Mill, the historic mill, and I was looking for protected marks. And if you go into the office and look back out, carved into the wooden door frame, you'll see a couple of the hexafoil protected marks.
That's cool.
More evidence of the practice in York County.
And what does that look like? What was it?
So the circle with the 6 petals in it,
Uh-huh.
the traditional hexafoil.
Yep.
Sometimes you see it on gravestones
Yep.
as well. And my understanding of it is that the evil spirit was supposed to like see it, be attracted to it, and then because the line never ends, they get trapped in it forever.
Yep.
Kind of continuously following the
Yep.
line.
I mean, in a time in York County when, I always want to believe in law and order, but things were different back then. And if you had something that make you feel like you're protected and that you're safe, I'm actually surprised it's not more practiced still. Yep.
Anyone else? Yes.
Just a quick comment.
Sure.
50 years ago, I wrote a paper on the murders.
Okay.
Couldn't find it. Anyway, I found all my notes. One thing I researched, I have a bunch of addresses in York City where there was powwow going on.
Oh, okay.
I went to one of the houses. An idiot. But anyway, I went to one of the houses and the younger people there just kind of rolled their eyes at me.
Uh-huh.
And there was an older woman there, and she just kind of looked at me like, shut up and go away. Okay, got it. So, it's like she knew something went on in that house.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, we didn't mention tonight, side comment, you know, a lot of people go legend tripping down in Ray Myers Hollow. Like, growing up, that's what my friends did. Like, we went legend tripping, looking for ghosts, but, you know, we were young and dumb and teenagers. You know, the property is private property,
Yeah,
right?
Please don't go trespassing at night on
Yep.
Halloween, or, you know, just don't do it.
Maybe we have time for one more?
The woman with the lost friend.
I just wanted to share the recipe for beer.
Oh, the recipe for beer, okay.
I have a long hidden friend. Take a handful of hops, 3 spoonfuls of ginger, a half gallon of molasses, strain it in a tub for a long time. That is a good beer.
A long time.
Well, what a way to end our program for tonight. So thank you all for coming out. We enjoyed talking with you.
If anyone brews that beer, bring it to us for a tasting.